My mother abandoned me after my father passed away and went on a trip with a younger lover. She ran away with the $10 million inheritance and left me with an alcoholic uncle who starved me. Hi Reddit, it's me, Max. I've been thinking a lot about something that happened when I was a kid. It's not the easiest thing to talk about, but I feel like I need to share it. Maybe putting it into words will help me understand everything better, or at least help me let go of some of the emotions I've been carrying for years. Mom did it. She poisoned my father to take my $10,000 inheritance. I didn't want to think about it for a long time, but, I miss the old mom so much. And the father who left too soon. You know, when I look back at my childhood, there was a time when life felt perfect. I didn't know it then, of course. Kids don't usually stop and think, wow, things are really great right now. But if I could freeze a moment in time, I'd go back to those days when it was just me, my mom Claire, and my dad Alan in our little house on Willow Lane. My dad was the kind of guy who lit up a room. He had this way of making people feel at ease, like everything was going to be okay. And his laugh, big and booming, was contagious. Every Saturday morning, he'd make pancakes for breakfast. He wasn't a great cook, but he'd joke about it, calling himself the Pancake King as he flipped uneven blobs of batter in the pan. I thought it was hilarious when he'd burn the first pancake on purpose, just to make me laugh. My mom, Claire, was softer in her humor, but no less loving. She was the one who made our house feel like a home. She always had this calm energy about her, like nothing could shake her. I remember how she'd sit at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, watching my dad with an amused smile as he pretended to battle the pancake batter. Sometimes, I'd sit on her lap, and she'd wrap her arms around me, humming a little tune. It felt safe. We had a big oak tree in our front yard. My dad used to say, "One day, Max, I'm going to build you the best treehouse ever." I believed him, of course, because back then, my dad could do anything. On sunny afternoons, we'd play catch under that tree until the shadows grew long. Sometimes my mom would join in, pretending to be terrible at throwing just to make us laugh. Evenings were special, too. My dad had a rule. No matter how busy the day was, we always ate dinner together. He'd tell these silly stories about his day at work, and my mom would roll her eyes, pretending she wasn't amused, but I knew she was. After dinner, there were bedtime stories. My dad would read from the same tattered book every night, doing all the voices, even the high-pitched ones for the princesses, while I giggled under the covers. We weren't rich. I mean, my parents didn't spoil me with fancy toys or extravagant trips, but I never felt like I needed more. We had each other, and for a kid like me, that was enough. There was this sense of stability, like the world was wrapped in a warm blanket. If someone had told me back then that life wouldn't always be like this, I probably wouldn't have believed them. How could it change? It felt like our little family was unshakable. But looking back now, I realize how fragile those moments were. I didn't know that everything I loved about my world could be taken away so quickly. It happened when I was 5. One day, my dad was there, strong, full of life, always cracking jokes, and then he wasn't. The arguments between Mom and Dad started small, but they didn't stay that way. I didn't understand much of what they were saying. Words like money and responsibility didn't mean much to me, but I knew it wasn't good. They'd go into the other room to talk, but I could still hear them through the walls. Dad's voice was calm, but it sounded tired. "We need to figure this out, Claire," he'd say. Mom, on the other hand, sounded angry and sharp. "I'm handling it, Alan," she'd snap. It felt like something had shifted in the house. Dad wasn't as playful as he used to be. He still came outside to toss a ball around with me, but not for as long. When he thought I wasn't looking, he'd sit on the porch steps and rub his chest. Mom seemed different, too. She was always busy with something, on the phone, staring out the window, or pacing back and forth. Then one evening, something happened that I didn't think much about at the time. We had finished dinner, and Dad was sitting in his favorite chair with the TV on. Mom brought him a cup of tea, which she didn't usually do. I was on the floor playing with my toys, and I saw her pull a little bottle out of her pocket and pour a few drops into the cup before handing it to him. "What's that?" I asked, looking up at her. Mom froze for a second and then smiled at me. "It's just something to help your dad feel better," she said, her voice light and quick. "Don't worry about it, Mac." Dad didn't even ask what it was. He just took the cup and started drinking, flipping through a magazine like it was nothing. I went back to my toys and forgot about it. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing changes. Dad seemed tired all the time. He wasn't laughing as much, and when he climbed the stairs, he'd stop halfway to catch his breath. "Are you sick, Dad?" I asked him one night when we were sitting on the couch. He smiled, but it wasn't the big, warm smile I was used to. It was smaller, like he didn't have the energy for more. "I'm okay, buddy," he said, patting my shoulder. "I just need to take it easy." Mom, on the other hand, was anything but calm. She started locking all the doors, even in the daytime. I'd catch her looking out the window, her face tight and serious. She spent a lot of time on the phone, too, whispering to whoever was on the other end. If I walked into the room, she'd hang up quickly and tell me to go play. I didn't really understand what was happening, but I could feel it. Something wasn't right. I didn't know how to stop it. Dad's death didn't feel real at first. One day he was there, sitting in his chair and ruffling my hair, and the next day he was just gone. I didn't understand much of what happened, just that Mom said his heart stopped working. I asked if the doctors could fix it, but she shook her head without looking at me. "No, Max. They can't," she said quietly. At the funeral, Mom didn't cry. Not once. She stood there stiff and pale, staring at the casket like she wasn't really there. People kept coming up to her, hugging her and saying things like, "He was such a great man," and "You're so strong, Claire." She just nodded, her eyes glazed over, like she was somewhere far away. After that, things got even stranger. Mom hardly talked to me, and when she did, her voice was flat and cold. She stopped making dinner and barely left her room. I'd come home from school and find her sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. Sometimes she'd whisper to herself, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. It was like she forgot I was even there. One night, I heard her moving around in the kitchen after I'd gone to bed. I got up and peeked around the corner. She was sitting at the table with papers spread out in front of her, muttering and flipping through them like she was looking for something. Then she slammed her hand down on the table and let out a shaky laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, it sounded broken, almost scary. I froze, not knowing what to do. "Mom," I said softly. Her head snapped up so fast it made me jump. "What are you doing up?" she barked. Her eyes were wide, almost wild, and she looked like a completely different person. I heard something," I stammered. She stood up, smoothing her hands over her hair, and tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Go back to bed, Max," she said, her voice trembling. I ran back to my room and pulled the covers over my head, but I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made my heart race. The next morning, Mom acted like nothing had happened. She poured herself coffee and sat at the table, staring out the window. I tried to talk to her, but she just waved me off. "Not now, Max," she said, her voice distant. From then on, it was like she was in her own world. She'd spend hours on the phone, whispering in the corner. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd snap, "Mind your business." Sometimes, she'd lock herself in her room for hours, and when she came out, her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. I didn't know what was wrong, but it felt like the Mom I knew was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. It was a few weeks after the funeral when Mom really broke down. I remember sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, trying to distract myself. The house had been so quiet since Dad was gone, the kind of silence that made every little sound feel louder. Mom walked into the room out of nowhere. She looked off. Her hair was a mess, her face was pale, and her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying for hours. I turned to say hi, but before I could, she sat down next to me and just stared at the floor. "Max," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "Can you turn that off for a second?" I clicked the TV off, confused. She hardly ever sat down with me like this, and definitely not with that look on her face. I need to tell you something," she stuttered. Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard, like she was trying to push the words out but couldn't quite manage. "What is it?" I asked, suddenly feeling nervous. She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. "It's all my fault," she said, her voice breaking. Then, out of nowhere, she burst into tears. "Mom," I said, panicking a little. I'd never seen her cry like this before, not even at the funeral. "It's all my fault," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "Your dad. Everything. It's all my fault." Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. What did she mean? How could it be her fault? I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, frozen, staring at her as she fell apart in front of me. After what felt like forever, she wiped her face with her sleeve and took a deep breath. Then she looked at me and forced a smile, a big, fake, shaky smile that only made her look scarier. "It's going to be okay, Max," she said, her voice suddenly light and cheerful, like nothing had just happened. "Everything's going to be fine. You don't need to worry about a thing." I didn't believe her. How could I? She looked like she was about to fall apart all over again. "You're going to stay with your uncle for a little while," she said, patting my knee like this was no big deal. "It'll be fun. You'll get to spend some time with Dean, and I'll take care of some things here." "Why can't I stay here?" I asked, my chest tightening. "Why do I have to leave?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around like she was looking for an answer on the walls. "It's just better this way," she said finally. "For both of us." "Better for what?" I pressed, feeling my voice shake. "Max," she said sharply, her fake cheerfulness slipping for a moment. Then she sighed and rubbed her temples. "Just pack your things, okay? It won't be for long." I wanted to argue. I wanted to ask more questions. But the way she looked at me, the desperation in her eyes, stopped me. I nodded and got up, heading to my room with my stomach in knots. From the hallway, I heard her mutter something under her breath. It was quiet, but I caught it. "He's gone. He's really gone." Her voice cracked again, but this time, she didn't cry. I went to my room and started throwing clothes into a bag, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a sinking feeling that things were about to get a whole lot worse. The drive to Uncle Dean's felt like it took forever. Mom didn't say much. She just kept her hands tight on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Her face was pale, and she looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. I sat in the back seat, holding my bag, feeling nervous but not knowing why. When we got to his house, I didn't like it right away. It was small and run down. The yard was a mess, with overgrown grass and junk everywhere. The paint on the house was peeling, and there were beer cans scattered on the porch. I didn't say anything, but I had a bad feeling about it. Mom knocked on the door, and after a while, Uncle Dean opened it. He was tall and scruffy, with a messy beard and a stained t-shirt. He looked at me, then at Mom, and frowned. "So, this is Max," he said, his voice gruff. "He looks scrawny." "Dean," Mom said quickly, like she was trying to stop him before he said something worse. "What?" "Just saying," he muttered, stepping aside. "Come in." The inside of the house was even worse. It smelled like smoke and old food. The carpet was dirty, and there were stains on the couch. Uncle Dean grabbed my bag and dropped it near the couch like it was trash. "All right, kid," he said, pointing a finger at me. "Here are the rules. Don't touch my stuff, don't ask me stupid questions, and don't get in my way." "Got it." I nodded, trying not to look scared. "Good," he said. Then he turned to Mom. "So, you're really leaving him here?" "It's just for a little while," Mom said softly. She wouldn't look him in the eye. Dean snorted. "Yeah, sure. We'll see about that." The second Mom left, Dean's attitude got worse. It was like he'd been waiting to let loose. That first night, I accidentally spilled a little soda on the table. It wasn't much, but Dean acted like I'd ruined his entire day. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "You can't even drink a soda without screwing up?" "I'm sorry," I said quickly, grabbing a napkin to clean it up. "Sorry doesn't clean the table," he barked. He grabbed a dirty rag from the sink and threw it at me. "Get it cleaned up, and try not to be such a screw-up next time." From then on, it was one thing after another. If I made any noise while playing, he'd yell, "Shut up! I'm trying to think." If I asked a question, he'd roll his eyes and mutter, "You're just as annoying as your mother." He liked to embarrass me, too. One day, he made me scrub the kitchen floor until my arms hurt. I thought I'd done a good job, but as soon as I finished, he spilled his beer right in the middle of the floor. Missed a spot, he said, grinning like it was the funniest thing ever. He'd always say mean things about my mom and dad. Your mom's a useless drama queen, he'd sneer. She dumped you here because she couldn't handle her own mess. He didn't have much love for my dad, either. Alan thought he was better than me, he said one night, leaning back in his chair with a beer. But where is he now? Dead in the dirt. Looks like I came out on top, huh? Then there were the comments about me. You're useless, just like your mom, he'd say. You'll never amount to anything. Your dad was an idiot for thinking you would. I hated every second there, but I didn't know what to do. I felt stuck, and Uncle Dean made sure I knew I wasn't going anywhere. One night, I was lying on the couch, trying to sleep. The house was quiet, except for the sound of the TV in the background. I hated being there, it was never comfortable, and I just wanted to go home. Every little noise made me nervous, the creak of the floor, the wind outside, and especially Uncle Dean stomping around. I was almost asleep when I heard him yell from the kitchen. It wasn't his usual angry complaining, this was loud, almost like he was losing it. She gave it to me for free, he shouted. I sat up, my heart racing. She took the money and ran off with some young idiot. His voice was getting louder. Left me here to deal with her kid, like it's my job. I crept to the edge of the couch and peeked around the corner. Uncle Dean was sitting at the kitchen table, red-faced, with a cigarette in one hand and a beer in the other. Across from him was his buddy, some guy I'd seen a few times before but never talked to. She poisoned him, you know, Dean said, slamming his beer on the table. Poisoned Alan. Took everything and disappeared. Now I'm stuck cleaning up her mess. His friend's eyes widened. No way. Are you serious? Dead serious, Uncle Dean snapped, blowing out a cloud of smoke. That woman's nothing but trouble. Left her brat with me like I don't have enough problems. I felt frozen, my chest tightening. Poisoned. Took everything. What was he talking about? She thought I'd just roll over and take it, Dean went on, his voice full of anger. Dumped the kid on me and skipped town. She owes me. Big time. I didn't want to believe him, but something about the way he said it made it feel real. Uncle Dean wasn't smart enough to lie about something like that, especially not to his friend. And the way he kept looking at me lately, like I was a problem he couldn't get rid of, it all started to make sense. Then his voice dropped lower, darker. You know what I'm gonna do if she doesn't come back for him, he said, leaning in toward his friend. I'll make her regret it. I'll make her wish she never left him here. My stomach sank. Uncle Dean hated me because of her, and it sounded like he was ready to take it out on me if she didn't come back. I backed away quietly, went back to the couch, and pulled the blanket over my head, trying not to cry. Things were bad already, but I knew they were about to get worse. After that night, everything got worse. Uncle Dean already hated having me around, but now it felt personal, like every time he looked at me, he saw my mom and all the things he blamed her for. And he didn't hold back. It started with yelling. If I left a toy out, he'd scream at me, his face turning red. You can't even keep your junk off the floor? Useless, just like your mother. If I made a noise while he was watching TV, he'd throw whatever was closest, a shoe, an empty can, at me. Sometimes he'd miss, but sometimes he didn't. Then it got physical. One time, I accidentally spilled a glass of water on the table. Before I could clean it up, he grabbed my arm and twisted it hard, dragging me to the sink. You want to make a mess, he snarled, shoving me toward the faucet. You can clean the whole damn kitchen now. I spent the next 2 hours scrubbing the counters and floors while he sat in his chair, watching TV and laughing at me. When I was done, he checked my work like I was some kind of servant. If he didn't like what he saw, he'd knock something over on purpose and make me start again. Food became another way for him to punish me. If I made him mad during the day, and it didn't take much, he'd forget to give me dinner. I'd sit at the table, my stomach growling, while he ate right in front of me. If you can't behave, you don't eat, he'd say, smirking. Sometimes there wasn't any food to eat, even when he wasn't angry. The fridge was mostly empty, except for a few beers and some ketchup packets. I'd try to make a meal out of whatever scraps I could find. Crackers, dry cereal, or a slice of bread if I was lucky. There was one night I'll never forget. I hadn't eaten all day because Uncle Dean said I was too much of a brat to deserve it. By bedtime, I was so hungry I felt sick. I sneaked into the kitchen and opened a cabinet, hoping to find something. Anything. I grabbed a can of soup and was about to open it when I heard his voice behind me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I froze, the can in my hand. I'm hungry," I stammered. He stormed over, snatched the can from me, and shoved me hard against the counter. "You don't take food without asking," he growled. Then he opened the can himself, poured it into the sink, and made me watch as it all went down the drain. "You want to eat," he said, leaning close to my face. "Then you better learn to follow the rules." I went to bed that night with tears in my eyes and an empty stomach, wishing I could just disappear. The worst, though, was when he locked me in the closet. It happened after I accidentally knocked over his beer. He grabbed me by the shirt, dragged me to the hall closet, and shoved me inside. "You can stay in there until you learn not to screw up," he said, slamming the door. I banged on the door, begging him to let me out, but he just turned up the volume on the TV. It was pitch black in there, and I was so scared I couldn't stop shaking. I didn't know how long I was in there. Long enough for my legs to cramp and my throat to get dry from crying. When he finally opened the door, I couldn't even look at him. "Get out," he said coldly. "And don't do anything stupid again." I didn't respond. I just stumbled to the couch and curled up under the blanket, trying to make myself as small as possible. I never knew what would set him off, and there was no way to avoid it. Every day felt like a fight to survive, and I was losing. That night, after he shoved me into the closet for what felt like hours, something changed in me. I sat there in the dark, knees pulled up to my chest, and for the first time, I thought, I can't stay here anymore. I didn't know where I'd go or how I'd get there, but I knew one thing for sure, I had to leave. When Uncle Dean finally let me out, I didn't cry or yell. I didn't even look at him. I just went to the couch, lay down under the blanket, and stared at the wall. But my mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about how I was going to get out. The next morning, I started planning. I didn't have much, but I started saving scraps of food wherever I could. If I found half a sandwich Uncle Dean left lying around, I'd wrap it up in paper towels and hide it under the couch. If there was a piece of bread or a cracker, I'd sneak it into my bag when he wasn't looking. I also started collecting loose change. Dean was careless with his money. He'd leave quarters and dimes on the table or by the TV. When he wasn't paying attention, I'd pocket them. It wasn't much, but it felt like something. Every time I had to leave the house with him, whether it was to run errands or go to the store, I paid attention. I watched the streets, memorized which roads led where. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I figured if I could find a town, someone would help me. It took weeks of sneaking around, hiding food, and holding my breath every time Dean got mad, but I finally felt ready. One night, when he passed out on the couch with a beer in his hand, I grabbed my bag, stuffed with all the food and coins I'd collected, and slipped out the door. The night air was cold, and I was shaking, partly from the chill and partly from fear. I didn't know if Dean would wake up and come after me, so I started walking fast, then running. I walked for what felt like hours, my legs aching and my stomach growling. The road was dark, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my feet. I didn't know where I was going, but I kept telling myself, just keep moving. Don't stop. Eventually, I saw lights in the distance. A town. My heart raced as I got closer, hoping I'd find somewhere safe. I spotted a building with a big sign that said, "Police," and without thinking, I ran straight to the door. Inside, it was bright and warm, but I was too scared to notice much. I walked up to the front desk, shaking so hard I could barely talk. I need help," I managed to say. The officer behind the desk looked up, his face softening when he saw me. "Hey there, kid," he said gently. "You okay?" What happened? I couldn't get the words out. Tears started streaming down my face, and I just shook my head. All right, he said, standing up and motioning for someone to come over. "Let's get you somewhere safe, okay? You're gonna be all right." I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. I was never going back to Uncle Dean's house. The next few days were a blur. After I showed up at the police station, everything seemed to move so fast. The officers asked me a lot of questions, about where I came from, what had happened, and why I ran away. I tried to tell them everything without breaking down again, but it wasn't easy. Eventually, they called in someone from Child Services. She was kind, with a soft voice and a warm smile, but I was still scared. They said they had to take me somewhere safe while they figured out what to do next. That's how I ended up in foster care. The family I was placed with was nice enough, but it didn't feel like home. Nothing did. I was just trying to process everything, trying to make sense of what my life had become. Meanwhile, the authorities started digging into what had happened. They talked to Mom and Uncle Dean, and pretty soon, the whole truth came spilling out. Mom tried to play the victim, acting like she had no choice but to leave me with Dean. I was struggling, she told them. I thought he'd take care of Max while I got back on my feet. But it didn't take long for them to figure out the real story. She'd racked up debts, more than she could ever pay off, and instead of facing it, she ran. She left me with Dean so she could disappear with some new boyfriend and start over. When the truth came out, it hit me hard. I kept thinking, my mom chose to leave me. She didn't even try to fix things, she just dumped me like I didn't matter. As for Dean, things didn't go well for him either. The police charged him with child abuse after hearing everything I'd been through. I didn't have to see him again, and I was glad. Just the thought of him made my skin crawl. Still, it was hard to move forward. I felt like I'd been thrown away by the people who were supposed to care about me most. Even though I was in a safer place now, I couldn't stop feeling angry and hurt. For years, I carried the weight of what happened, and it felt impossible to let go. At first, I didn't even realize how much it was affecting me. I just felt angry, sad, and stuck. Therapy helped me start unpacking everything step by step. It wasn't an easy process, though. Some days, I'd feel like I was making progress, and then something small would remind me of those dark times. A word, a sound, or even a smell could bring back the fear, the shame, and the pain as if it had all just happened yesterday. But little by little, I began to heal. I learned to talk about what I went through, even though it was hard. I stopped blaming myself for what happened and started understanding that it wasn't my fault. I was just a kid. I deserved to be loved, cared for, and protected, but the people who were supposed to do that let me down. Over time, I found strength I didn't know I had. I realized I didn't have to let what they did define me. I chose to move forward, to build a better life for myself. Now, I'm surrounded by people who care about me, friends who treat me with kindness and respect, people who make me feel like I matter. I know now that family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up for you, the ones who support you and make you feel safe. I still have tough days. Trust doesn't come easily to me, and sometimes I worry about being abandoned or hurt again. But I remind myself that I'm not that scared, helpless kid anymore. I've found my voice, I've built my confidence, and I know my worth. If someone tries to treat me the way my mom or Dean did, I don't let it slide. I stand up for myself now because I know I deserve better. Sometimes, I think about what my life could have been like if my dad had lived or if my mom had made different choices. I wonder what it would have felt like to grow up in a home filled with love and security. But I can't change the past. What I can do is take everything I've learned and use it to create a better future. One day, when I have a family of my own, I'll make sure my kids never feel the way I did. They'll know they're loved, no matter what. The most important thing I've learned is that my past doesn't define me. It's good to have people around who can be supportive and help you through a difficult time in your life. I couldn't have done it without my adoptive parents. They helped me move on with my life, giving me the amazing gift of family and love.